What is up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Boom Athletics High Performance Podcast. I am your host, Seth Boomsma. I am excited to bring you guys this episode with Jackson Cheung of Canada, speed power coach and athlete himself. This one was very informational, and if you're interested in anything sprint training related, getting faster for your sport, whatever the case may be to deal with speed and power, this is the podcast for you. The way Jackson can articulate his words, I mean, this is one of the finest young men and coaches in this business that you'll ever be fortunate enough to listen to. So without further ado, let's dive into this right away.
Too bad. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Jackson Cheung. I'm pretty active on Instagram. I think this is the first time I'm doing something like an interview. But I am located in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and I do a lot of sprint coaching. I do some physical prep stuff as a strength coach as well, and I'm also a competing sprint hurdler. So just a coach and athlete like many of us are, and I'm just a big fan of track and field and just physical preparation in general. And yeah, short and sweet. I think I hit all the points.
Yeah, I like that. So why don't you tell the audience how old you are? Because the first time I met you was through Instagram, obviously, like you just mentioned. I think you messaged me. I posted like a block start. You messaged me something like, oh, I'd be curious to know what the 10, 20, and 30-meter splits were. And like once you asked that question, I was like, okay, this guy actually knows his stuff.
Right.
Because a lot of people will just like respond with like a fire emoji or something like that. I was like, okay, like I'll give him the time of the day. Then eventually we just kind of kept talking on Instagram DM, and our conversations are like really in depth and training on everything. So how old are you?
I'm 23 years old. So I graduated university just a year ago. I graduated in 2018. I studied psychology and philosophy, and yeah, I'm pretty young, man. Like when Dan Paff was here in Vancouver last year for a conference, I was picking him up from the airport, and I told him I was a coach, and he just said, "You're really young for a coach." And yeah, I get that all the time. Like, you're super young, because we often know that coaching, you don't get paid. There are no like full-time salaries in Canada or wherever. And you just wouldn't expect a young guy to be a coach, but yeah, here I am. That's what I do. I'm super young.
Yeah. No, I like that, because I was kind of like the same way. Like when I was like 15 or 16 and like started taking track like super serious, like I cut off every other sport, and I was like reading like like elite track, Charlie Francis forums and stuff, and like asking all these coaches questions. And they'd respond like, how old are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm only 16. They're like, what? Like, what's going on here? So when was the first time that you started really diving into like the training methods and everything?
Dude, and this is exactly why we get along so well. It's because we kind of live the same life of being a track academic and starting really young. When did I start diving in? It must have been, so I kind of got in through physical preparation, the gyms type of stuff, strength and conditioning, when I was maybe grade 8 or 9. So I was 14 or 15. I know I was really interested in breakdancing. So I was browsing bboy.org forums in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and doing that. And breakdancers being very physically prepared, some of them on YouTube. This is still back when YouTube was in its heyday. Were sharing some workout videos. So I kind of started out as a YouTube fitness audience, watching bodybuilders share workouts on YouTube, and then from there on I kind of got into T Nation, and T Nation it gets you excited about strength and conditioning because they throw so much sexy stuff that sells on there. So I started pretty young with T Nation, and then I kind of read some Charlie Francis stuff, and yeah, I was maybe in grade 10 when I was jumping straight into more folk type bodybuilding science stuff. So yeah, I started really early, 14, 15. Started through YouTube, as many of us all do. So
Yeah, I love it. And especially with today's era, there's so much information out there. Even now, I catch myself like reading old forum boards
Uh-huh.
because forums aren't really quite as popular as they used to be
Bang
when
on.
like we were both kind of growing up in this coaching world. But there's a lot of gold information in there. Who
Absolutely.
are your biggest coaching influences that you've really dived into and learned from?
Mm, uh, I'd say I have a couple that I haven't met, and a couple that have coached me and have mentored the way I thought. So my biggest two coaching influences that have mentored me, that I have spent time with and in real time, and those that are Canadian in Canadian track and field will know these names. So my primary coach in university, I didn't go through the club route that most athletes have gone through. So my first real time full time coach was my university coach, which is rather late. But his name is Jason Kerr. He is running the Superstar program in Guelph, Ontario, and they have two guys that have gone under 46 seconds, which is a fantastic achievement this season. So he's leading a Superstar group. Guelph, Ontario, if you guys don't know, is the first North American facility or university to have gone the 1080 sprint. So I spent a lot of time on the 1080 sprint, not knowing what it was. I wish I kind of spend more time doing some stuff on it. But Jason Kerr, so he was also a very young coach. He started coaching at the university level when he was 25, 26, super young, just as young as I am now. And in 5 years, he kind of brought the university to the most winning sprints program in Canada. So he's one of my biggest coaching influences, and just the way he kind of presents himself and communicates. Just cracking the silliest jokes with with the university athletes. So that's kind of how I roll now with my high school students. So he's been a big influence. He was actually one of the moderators on Charlie Francis forums, believe it or not. Another influence of mine is Shane Firth. So he was the Waterloo head coach for 10 years. He's now kind of moved on from that position and handed the program on to a different coach. But he's a big influence on me in kind of how he approaches training scientifically. So he has a more kind of traditional coaching route, which is he got his kin degree and he started coaching under Brent McFarlane in Waterloo, Ontario, in Waterloo. So he did that, and he's influenced me in the sense that he's very blunt and he's very imprecise in kind of how he communicates. So, I mean, one telling example is when I asked him, like, how do people get faster? He just gave me the answer. They're just better at putting force into the ground. He wasn't selling any tricks. Like, it's not about fly 30 or block 30 and all that stuff. Doing some more sleds. He was just very scientific. This is what you need to do. I'm not sure what it is, but this is probably what you need to do. So that's kind of influenced me in that I'm very honest. I'm very imprecise sometimes. When people ask me for a straight answer, I just tell them, dude, I don't even know, man. So those have been my big coaching influences. Um, Outside of mentors that I've spent time with, I'd say the biggest influence on me in terms of training theory and kind of how I see sprinting in general is Charlie Francis and Derek Evely, Canadian coaches. So people that have influenced me.
Perfect. I like it. So, obviously you're coaching now and everything, and you're training also. You're also coaching yourself.
Yeah.
So what would be like an ideal weekly setup for you, or athletes that you coach? Do you have like a template that you follow? Obviously, everything's going to be individualized, like when you work with athletes. But is there a simple template that you like to kind of like that's your go-to in terms of weekly setup?
Oh, definitely. And I mentioned Charlie Francis, and I say I'm a Charlie Francis system through and through. So I start my approach to any kind of training as Charlie Francis would, and his setup is always available, which is it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday setup. So 3 high intensity days, and every other day is a low intensity and recovery. So it's a high-low polarized training system, just like any sprint training program is usually now. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I'll have Monday and Friday as exclusive speed development days. So that might look like a all-out run to 60 meters. Those are Monday and Fridays. And Wednesdays I reserve as special endurance or speed endurance days. Speed endurance more in the early season prep, and special endurance kind of a little later on. So that's kind of how I start off, and I have 3 cycles per year, and the emphasis might change, but it always remains Monday, Friday. Those are high intensity days. We're doing high quality speed work, and Wednesdays are the more kind of just get in the volume, but they're still high intensity. So that's my workout template that I use for myself and for some of the athletes. But I think I need to reduce density just a touch. I don't think many of my high school guys can handle 3 running speed sessions. So next year I might look to taking out Wednesday as more of a general fitness day. So that's my template.
Nice. I like it. So what are you doing on those low intensity days on like a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday setup? Are you hitting tempo, or are you hitting circuits? What are you doing?
So that's so maybe I'd offer up another template. Back when I was in university, we did a big damn path template. So it was a speed endurance. So you'd have 4 high intensity sessions. I find that doesn't work too well with me. And on a lot of the low intensity days, we would do circuits. So I've kind of moved back into more kind of Charlie Francis type setup. So I do large amounts of tempo running. So I'm probably hitting at least 1,600 meters of tempo running at around 70% speed. And then I'll do some abs. The highest amount of ab reps I've gone up to is 700 reps. I know Charlie posts 1,000 rep low intensity day workouts, but I can't make it there. 700 has been the highest, but I count everything. So
that's what I always found the exact same thing coming from. I come from like Charlie Francis background as well, and like I always kind of look at the ab numbers. I'm like, geez, there's no way I could do it. Like, so what type of ab exercises are you doing when you're hitting those 700 reps?
So I have the first 200. I'm not that consistent because sometimes I don't ever make it to 3 low intensity sessions. Sometimes it might just be 2. Usually it's 2. But after my running, I'll an ideal day might be 200 med ball reps. So they're in different positions. It's more of a circuit fashion. Everything's 20 reps. So I might have a med ball sit up. I might have a twist. I might have a seated good morning. I might have a back hyper. So all kinds of things. That'll get me 200 reps. And then I'll do at least 300 of just a rather easier exercise, so more of a crunch. So maybe I'd hit 30 crunches times sets of 10. So that'll get me to 500. Yeah. And usually I'm pretty cooked by then. So I don't know how I make it to 700, but it's I like hitting not just sagittal plane exercise, so just like the crunch or weighted sit-ups, all that stuff. I also include twists and some rotations, which I found have really helped. So I might do I might put a med ball over my head and I'll twist off to the left and right. So I always include some type of out of the sagittal plane exercises in all my abs.
Love it. Yeah. And for athletes out there listening to this, listen to what he just said about his core work. It's not purely just flexion, core exercises where he's constantly doing crunches. It's a variety and hitting a variety of planes as well.
Exactly.
So diving a little bit further into your template, like you kind of listed a little bit what you do for speed work and speed endurance and stuff. What about your plyometrics?
Dude, that's a piece I haven't quite figured it out. My plyometrics, I will make some changes next year, but I think my plyos have generally been pretty. It's not as difficult as you make it out to be, as people like to make it out to be. So some key exercise that I've used this year is the speed bound. So I'll list three of them. Speed bound. Number two is a hurdle hop, set really low, but I'm just aiming for quick reactivity off the ground. And the third one I've used is a single leg drop jump off of a 13-inch box. So those have been my three big exercises. I chose a speed bound because it's more of a horizontal exercise in creating displacement, hurdle hop for top speed, and the single leg drop jump. Sorry, the single leg drop jump. I've chosen it more as a more specific exercise for the takeoff leg in the sprint hurdle. So those are the big three exercises, and I maybe have a sessional volume of around 48 foot contacts 3 times a week. So that's kind of how I do it. I haven't quite figured out when to load it up a little bit more, because I find 48 on the easier side, but it works really well. So I've seen improvements in my abilities in all of them. So I don't feel the need to do any more than 48 foot contacts.
Yeah, I agree. I love depth jumps. So I kind of almost go depth jump crazy a little bit to a certain extent. And I found kind of sweet spot per week for depth jump contacts. And I was dropping off a 30 to 40 inch box with about 75 contacts per week.
Per week?
Occasionally I touched on
Okay.
Yeah. Occasionally I got up to 100. But then it just almost felt like I was, like just doing a couple junk reps at the end. But obviously you have a little bit more variety in there too.
For sure. Yeah.
Where I was just hitting the same exact thing. So, like the new fad nowadays, I think in the sprinting world and sprinting and hurdling world, is the tendon stiffness aspect.
Yeah.
And I know you've posted quite a bit about it. So what's your take on tendon stiffness, and what type of exercises have you used to improve tendon stiffness?
I was just reading some articles last night because I'm doing an eccentric preparation kind of phase right now. So I'm planning for a six week general prep. So I'm using this time to kind of build my strength in the hip and the knee and the ankle. So I'm doing some eccentric stuff. And one of the intuitive benefits for eccentric training is that you get a big stimulus to the tendon just because of the kind of high mechanical tension loads that you'll create on the body while you're doing them, because you can go much over the concentric max. And I don't know how to test this out. That's why I don't ever post anything about the tendon, just because I can't observe it. So I'd love to know more about it if I had like a ultrasound machine so I can see whether my tendons are growing thicker. Like I'm grabbing my Achilles right now, and I've been kind of just checking it out recently. I feel like it's gotten thicker, but I'm not sure. I wish tendon was as easily observable as muscle is, but tendon stiffness. So my take on it is it's whether it's a tendon that is really stiff or whether it's the muscle that can create more force isometrically, leading to the tendon being better in storing and recoiling energy. It doesn't really matter to me. What particularly I'm looking at is the joint deformation. So if I'm looking at my ankle, I don't care whether the tendon is growing thicker or whether the density within the collagen is getting better for sprinting. I'm looking at, in a video, whether my heel hits the ground. Just simply that. Like it's coachable, it's practical. I don't have to rely on machinery. I don't have to see whether my tendons are growing thicker. So that's kind of how I see it. So I don't usually talk about tendon stiffness or muscle stiffness. I just use the joint deformation, or how stiff can the joint be when you fall off a box, or how stiff can it be when you're running. So and I think it's a massive difference. So PJ Vazelle actually posted a Usain Bolt's warm up recently. Have you seen it? It's actually
quite I was actually just watching that today, actually.
Oh, it's amazing. And the coolest thing about it is Usain Bolt is just prancing. Like his heels do not touch the ground. And I've seen that a lot with some Japanese sprinters. There's one guy I like a lot, and his heels they don't fall at all. They don't displace at all. So that to me is someone who has incredible joint stiffness, that maybe their force propulsion characteristics aren't that high, but that they can really kind of efficiently recycle energy. So I care a lot about that. I think it's immensely useful just because of the coaching evidence that we have from coaches like Joseph Coyne and Randy Huntington and Alex Ventura. For example, I love Randy's story about when Su Bingtian joined his group, his calf raise power on the Kaiser machine was only 700 something watts. That means he was weaker than his weakest female, and now he's at 2,000 something. And I've noticed that too. Like I have Kaiser racks. I don't have the machine, so the numbers are different. But I could only hit 800 something watts, and I can't move it anymore. And now that I've done a lot more ankle work, I feel like I can really pop off the ground. So I think that's definitely a key exercise, a key special exercise for sprinting speed. And I know Charlie Francis didn't like the ankle exercises because he had some bad stories about people getting Achilles overuse issues and rupturing their Achilles. But that's only because one of the coaches that he referenced, that Charlie referenced, they were doing 500 foot contacts in one session. So it's not the ankle exercise that's the problem. It's just sanity of training load. But most of the load that's done on the ankles isn't propulsion, which is why when he references it, it only hits 700 something watts in comparison to the hip, which can produce 3,500 watts. It's more as a shock absorber. So it's on accepting the ground contact where the soleus and the gastroc does the most work. I think it's 8 times body weight forces, but it doesn't do so much as in plantar flexion. So it's more of a preventing the heel to drop rather than using the ankle to push the body. So I think it's incredibly important for both acceleration and top speed because they're related.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So I was at USA's indoors in 2018 when Coleman broke the world record, and we're warming up for prelims, and it's small, like 2-lane track at the Albuquerque Convention Center, and Coleman's just doing easy crouch starts, and I tell you what, his ankle stiffness, and you said, I like how you said just watch how the heel drops.
Yeah,
there was no leakage in there, and obviously people see it on like YouTube and stuff. When you see it on video, it's one thing, but when you see it live in person, I'm like, this guy's incredible. I mean, like the way he just sprints off the ground, like he's probably hitting close to 100 millisecond ground contact times in the Excel, like on step 3. I mean, it's insane. And echoing off of that, so we were just talking at the beginning about how we were both, track academics, at a very young age. I was 21 years old. I'm 27 now. This was back in 2014. I just pulled it up on Twitter. I'm not going to say the coach's name just to respect him. But I had a little conversation with a coach. He was talking about tempo work and stuff like that, and he was promoting circuits, and that's another topic for another day. But I brought up the word tendon compliance, which is essentially tendon stiffness. And this was before the whole fad was back in the day, that we have right now since like 2017, really, that this tendon stiffness started. And I brought up, I mentioned, what about tendon compliance? And he said, I roll with a lot of coaches much smarter than I, and I've never heard anyone use the term tendon compliance. Do you, but come on. Huh. And he basically bashed me because, one, he's never heard that term before, and 2, because I was only 21 at the time. Uh-huh. And if you guys want to search on it, you can search my Twitter name, and you can search tendon with my Twitter name, and you might be able to come across it. But like I said, I'm not going to say the coach's name, but that just goes to show you that you have to have a willingness to adapt throughout your coaching career or athletic career. I'm not as well versed in the tendon stiffness topic, because like you and I just don't have a way to measure it. We just measure, we can study ground contact times and different things like that using like my Jump 2 app or different things, but we don't quite have the technology. Right. And, I want to branch into that. You mentioned you worked with the 1080, and I know we've talked about before, we would love to have it. especially reading all these articles and seeing guys fly with it. What is your take on overall overspeed work?
Overspeed, again, the Charlie Francis side of Jackson Cheung wants to say, no, if overspeed is going to work, just buy an airplane ticket. Traveling 600 kilometers per hour, that'll get you fast. I love that. I love that story from him. But overspeed, it matters a lot because and there's another layer to it, but it matters a lot because Charlie Francis himself used it, and we know, like for example, I've studied Bondarchuk and his kind of exercise categories very well, and the SDE category, the specific developmental exercise, is where the overspeed falls in, and when you want to raise your sport capacities to the highest levels, most of the work that's going to help you do that is in the SDE. So it's going to be for us sprinters, it's going to be resisted speed, so having a resistance while you're running, or it's going to be overspeed, which is you're creating velocities or limb velocities that are actually higher than what you experience in a regular sprint. And you don't have to have a 1080 to do this. Like I know that if you use a sub-maximal acceleration rate and you have a full-on sprint right after that zone will be higher than what you can achieve than a all-out 60-meter run. So a 40 plus 20 is just sub-maximal 40, and you do a 20 zone. In this 20 zone, you're working on overspeed. So you're able to work on the turnover or just have a little bit more so that you can accelerate deep into the rep. That is an overspeed rep. And it's probably the safest overspeed rep and the most accessible because you don't need someone towing you. You don't need any tools. And that's my go-to drill. I know a lot of the coaches is kind of moving away from the fly 30 as the goal, as a be-all and end-all for top speed. But if you have adequate acceleration abilities, short acceleration abilities from 0 to 30, then having that overspeed zone is what you need to get more speed from 30 to 50. So I think overspeed is a must at some point of the season after early acceleration abilities have been done, whether it's done with a big tailwind, with towing, with a 1080, or with a setup, an energy distribution setup like the fly drill, the speed chain drill. It doesn't matter. So that's why I haven't felt tempted to kind of get a 1080, because I believe you have to do overspeed, but I don't think that the 1080 or assisted motor-driven devices are the only way to get it. I think you can just do it by going easy for the first 30 meters.
So, yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, I remember reading that as well. What sort of fly times are you hitting when doing that type of setup versus if you're timing like a 10-meter segment in that 60?
God, I don't have any numbers that I can give you right now, but any numbers I can think of. So okay, a good example. It's hard to compare. It's hard to compare numbers, but one caveat to what I've just mentioned is that when you do a fly setup, where you hit the top velocity is going to be different. So if you go out harder from the get-go, you'll get a top speed that's a little higher in the beginning. So maybe at 20 to 30 meters. But if you go easier, it's not slow. If you go easier, you might hit top speed at 40 to 50. So I think I'll have to bring it up, but some of my sprinters in one session, I had them go all out and easy. There might be a difference of 0.03. So here, one guy, so his best in the fly 10 is 0.99. After he hits a 0.99, his subsequent segment is 1.11. So the drop off is pretty high. And I've seen that with myself. My PB fly 10 is 0.98, and the zone after the fly 10 best zone is 1.09. So it's a trade-off of higher speed, but you don't get much after that. So yeah, does it help?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I like that. That just kind of gives our audience kind of a general outline of what to expect when doing that easy 40-meter build and having
Uh-huh.
that 20-meter fly zone.
It must be easy. It can't be slow because I've done it slow and you don't get up to speed. Like I've hit 1.03s all day just because I'm building it up really slowly and then I'm hitting it. But once I went fast, like fast but not all out, I was hitting 0.99s and one flat. So yeah, it makes a
Yeah,
difference. Not much, but it's enough to change the adaptations, the rhythm that you're feeling. You feel a little bit more lift. So it's a technical drill. It's overspeed for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh, so we've established kind of sprinting. We've established different plyometrics. What about special exercises in the weight room? I know you mentioned at the beginning you're playing around with some eccentrics and different things
Yeah.
like that.
Special exercises. What things am I trying right now? So I don't like, dude, Seth. I mean, me and you both know I love the bench press more than you. Like I love the videos you have. 365 for a double. My God, I don't know how you lifted that because that's actually my best squat. But I don't special exercises to me are exercises that build same capacities but aren't specific movement patterns. So anything in the weight room to me is a special exercise, even the bench press, because I have some cool anecdotes about when my sprint times go up, my bench press goes up. When my bench press is down, my speed times don't move at all. So my best bench this year was 112 kilos for one rep after my competition season or after my competition season indoors. And I was actually surprised because I was only working 96 kilos for a best of 4 reps, and I was hitting 112 kilos. At the same time, my speed times were at its highest, marked by an indoor PB on my season opener. But like thereafter that season, my speed times have plateaued, and my bench press has been 90 kilos for the longest time. So um, anything in the weight room is a special exercise to me. So it's a bench press, it's the calf raise, it's a chin up, whatever it is. But some special exercise that I'm using right now is I like Alex Natiro's work a lot. So right now, the two exercises that are worth talking about is the hip eccentric exercise that I'm using and the ankle exercise I'm using. So on the ankle exercise, it's just you use two leg to overcome the eccentric or overcome the concentric, and then you use one leg to load up the eccentric. And right now I'm working with around 250 pounds. That's around 90% of my isometric max. So I'm trying to build up to in the next couple of weeks, build up to over 110% of my isometric max, which I'm getting to now because my motor control at the higher loads for 5 seconds on the lowering is getting pretty good. I know last year I was already trying to play with some of the hip and ankle stuff, and this was after I did 480 meters of speed work and a bunch of isometric, heavy step ups and hip eccentric exercises after a 1 month break, and there was no second workout because I hurt myself on the last warm up rep after not having sprinted for a month. So I'm being very careful with it right now. One of the studies that I read last night, research participants started the first session with 100% concentric max for the eccentric for 6 seconds, and within 6 workouts they went up to 120%, I think. And these are research participants. So
Wow.
so I'm being pretty careful right now, but I don't want to hurt myself again because that it kind of sucks. But the hip stuff I'm doing mainly for acceleration, like we've talked about in the past. My early acceleration, is pretty weak because I think I'm pretty strong around a squat exercise, but my bum and my hamstrings are a little weak. So I'm trying to get my hips quite strong to kind of create more horizontal net force. That's really influenced me. JB Warren's research on kind of how you accelerate into a race is really influencing me. So I'm doing a lot of hip and horizontal vector exercises. So that's why I care a lot about the hip and some weighted Nordic, some hamstring curls, reverse leg press, and the ankle stuff is just kind of just to kind of keep them there. So that when I am getting up to top speed, the quality's already developed. So, but yeah, other than that, like I'm pretty simple, man. Like I might go 3 sets of 10 on my exercises, 4 sets of 8, gym bro stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
3 sets of 10.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, those two exercises that you're playing around with. And I'm excited to kind of see your results overall from them. In terms of the weight room for some of your athletes, are you sticking with, the very general type stuff, or are you playing around with some of this stuff a little bit on the lighter side?
Yeah, so at the strength and conditioning facility I'm at, a lot of the athletes I work with are youth athletes. So I have no problems loading them up bilaterally in the sagittal range, just because a lot of the females can't even do push-ups yet. So we're working up to that. So that's I just think if you're a team sport athlete, just getting basically stronger is going to help to some point. And none of them are quite at that threshold yet. So I have no hesitation just kind of keeping them to basic stuff like a dumbbell press, a goblet squat. That's heavy. That's enough for their needs. With some of the older track athletes I have, we haven't been able to secure a weight room facility that is accessible for the group. And I have huge hesitations in kind of giving athletes their own weight program. I always know that the senior male athletes that I work with, they're doing much more than that. So I'd rather not write the program. Because, for example, one of the athletes that I worked with, when he went on when he had a 1 week break, he came back and he almost forgot how to run because he was going completely front side. And I thought, dude, man, like it's gonna take 2 weeks to change that, and it did take 2 weeks. So I hesitate giving athletes their own workouts, but what I have one athlete I'm working with right now. He's a senior kind of sprinter. I'm just making him do some general GPP stuff. He doesn't need to get fancy yet. He's not strong at all. Like he can probably squat 150 pounds at 160-pound body weight. So,
oh wow.
So they're quite weak. Some of the athletes I work with, but in the next year, I kind of want to get them a little stronger and maybe introduce some specific stuff. Like for example, I might play around with the hip stuff, just with body weight, with a partner elevating your heels. I think just doing body weight stuff like that is going to help in those specific ranges. But I haven't felt the need to kind of load them up eccentrically, like I have for myself, who can squat 2 times body weight, bench 1.5 times. So
yeah,
1.4. So I'm a little bit moved on in training than they are. So they just need to catch up to just basic strength.
Yeah, exactly. So let's give some of these listeners kind of a background. You have work with a track club, right?
Yep.
Is that correct? How many athletes are in this track club? I know we kind of talked about it a little bit about it before.
Right. Within my group, the highest count we've ever had is 34 athletes, split between 2 to 3 coaches.
Okay.
30,
so how do you
34.
manage that? Because you're usually hitting about 10 athletes, give or take, you know, just for you. How are you managing all that?
Dude, it's terrible. And I can send you a picture of our track. So our track is in central Richmond, and there are probably 150 to 200 seniors, just because doctors send them to this track, that walk around the track. So during some of our evening sessions, we have up to 200 people walking around. So we have a permit with the city that blocks off a section of the track that lets us run unimpeded. But how do we manage it? So this year we had a lot of senior athletes. They're now moving on now to universities and other things. But we had a grade 8, which recently graduated from the younger developmental group that our kind of JD coaches were working with. A grade 8 group, a grade 10 group, which are usually kind of the more beginner type of sprinters. And then we have a grade 12 athlete. So what I do is we have a whiteboard and we write down the workouts for each group on the whiteboard. And we just make sure that they try to understand at the beginning of the workout so that they kind of self-organize themselves in groups. So a grade 8 group might do more kind of general fitness type of thing, and a grade 12 group might do longer speed runs. So that's kind of how I do it. But it's a pretty terrible situation sometimes because I'm a big numbers guy. Like I try to keep track of all numbers and performances. And sometimes I can't even stopwatch my long sprinters times just because I can't see them when they're within the people that are walking. So it's a pretty crazy time at the track with the big athlete group and with how many people are accessing the track. But yeah, next year our group is going to be smaller, so I hope to be a little bit more attentive and kind of doing the same thing I do for myself, which is recording performances and having sit downs, talking about more educational type of stuff in approach to sprinting. Because sometimes it just drives me crazy. There's a guy who always asks me like how hard he should go before a sprint, and I'll say 90%, and the guys, or I'll say 70%, and the guy's whizzing at 95%. It's like, what? It felt like 70%. I'm like, no, God, no. So some personal time and some smaller athlete groups is going to be better. But yeah, it's just nature of Canadian track and field, which is not the best situation.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that. I just thought of an athlete that I work with when you said the 70%, and he goes 95. I had an athlete, and we were like, he did like the front side thing where his arms are just purely in front, kind of like the Lloyd Christmas run on Dumb and Dumber type thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we need to fix this. So like we basically tore this apart. Like we basically pulled him from the USATF summer series, and we're like, okay, we need to go ground zero and get ready for 2020 because you're not gonna. You're not gonna make the national meet right now. Let's get on the podium next year for our South Coast State meet. And we were just doing crouch starts. My intern and I were there, and I was like, okay, go 60%, and he takes off, and I swear, like you just said it. I swear it was like his 95 to 100, and I'm like, was that really 60%? He's like, oh yeah. Like this is my 90%, and he just takes off, blasts a sprint. Okay. I'm like, whoa, no, let's slow down here.
Okay.
So like, we really had to go back to the basics with him.
For sure.
And when you're dealing with these young athletes, because like you said, you're trying to educate all these guys and athletes and stuff. What are some simple technical cues that you give them?
Some simple technical cues might be. Think about your hands. So I have a big emphasis on the arms, hands down, which just means strike your hands down quicker. Let your arms drive the sprint stride rather than thinking about your legs too much. Hands down, get your arms down. And usually that fixes some problems. Sometimes you might inherit an athlete that kind of comes from a poor background. So I have a distance athlete who is just backside. So her spine is just in a C shape, and there's no front side action at all. And one session, I just had to make her do 30 something dribble over the shin. But yeah, even that didn't work. So usually I like to approach it by kind of managing the sprint distances. So when my guys look like crap at 50 meters, my tendency is to just reduce them down to 10 meters, and it usually fixes itself. So I found anything like longer than 30 meters is really hard to kind of have them have good form. So I use the sprint distance as a technical assistant rather than telling them too much. That seemed to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does the Canadian track and field system work? Do you guys have like the, like high school state championships, or how does it work over there? Just to give our U.S. audience a little bit of a background there.
Yeah, so Canada is very hierarchized. So you'll start out when you're 7+, I think, or 9+. You'll jump in a JD program. So that's just junior development program in the club. And you'll probably get 2-3 coaching practices a week that kind of puts you in different events. So you're trying out throws and jumps and sprints. Just kind of get the athlete kind of feeling out track and field. And then after that, you'll join a high school group, and then usually college, blah, blah, blah. So it's very bottom up, bottom level building up. It's kind of like a pyramid. Not sure if I can explain that well, but a lot of volunteer coaches that kind of undergird that model, and then the top feeders are probably university coaches because unlike the States, or maybe just like the States, there's only two ways to kind of be a full-time coach in Canada. It's either you're tied to a university or you work with CSI, which is the Canadian Sport Institute. So those are the only two positions that you can really occupy as a full-time coach. Some coaches might make a little more. Like I know that one coach in Canada, he makes 90 grand. So, but he's one out of very many. There are a lot of volunteer coaches. So kind of that's how it works. So a lot of the coaches are teachers. That's usually it. So young coaches, it's kind of rare to find, and yeah, it's more of a you work your way up with experience rather than being a bomb ass apprentice coach. For example, like guys like Steve Fudge and Jonas Dodu, and those guys, they wouldn't really live well in the Canadian system just because they couldn't have had those apprentice coach positions, so they can't work with a full-time coach, right, and learn under them. So that's kind of the challenge of doing being in a Canadian environment. You have to do everything yourself. So whether it's getting weight room access or organizing more practices or doing communication, you have to do everything yourself rather than have like a university find everything for you, like find a physical therapist and do all that stuff. Like my coach spent maybe a year finding us a physical therapist. So it's very independent in Canada. But yeah, that's more on the coaching side. But just like you guys, we have some strong provincial championships, which aren't as deep in the prairie provinces, but the biggest championships, Ontario, OFSA championships, and BC, those are the biggest high school meets in North America. I think BC is the highest with 1,000+ athletes at the state provincials. So,
oh wow, yeah,
that's kind of how we do it. And we have a big. I know in the states is the thing. Like if you get to go to states, you're a freaking like Olympian at your high school. But for us, we have more of a club environment. So you'll go to nationals. You'll make provincial teams to go to nationals, and make national teams to go to Pan Am Junior Championships, World Championships, that type of thing. In the U.S., I think it's more high school coaching rather than club coaching. But in Canada, it's more club. So
yeah, definitely. I know, like I'm not sure if you're familiar with like South Dakota. So we have similar weather to you guys. We can just drive up to North Dakota and we get right to the Canada border here. But I have my own club here as well, and I'm only one of one youth club in South Dakota. So it's definitely, it's just high school dominant. And this year was our first year where we actually sent athletes to our USATF summer series, but here in the States, it's kind of like what you grow up around. So here it's all like AAU summer basketball and JO volleyball and different things like that. But I've grown the club to quite a bit of athletes, and I think next year we're really going to hit it out of the park. But, like diving in back to your own past season and stuff, I know we kind of talked about this on Instagram. What are some few things that you learned this past year and that you'll kind of either change or just do differently for this upcoming season?
Some things for Jackson Cheung are work on early acceleration, because that drives absolutely everything. So whether you can hit a high top speed or for the hurdles, you need 0 to 30 meter speed, which is kind of what I lacked. So my speed development has kind of been lacking the past 4 years. So I graduated university with the joke that I wouldn't even have made the women's 4x2 relay team. Like my one weekend, I ran 24 low for the 200, and one of my teammates that I barely beat was was saying to me, because I was complaining about one of my bug bites. Fuck, these mosquitoes are really popular in the summer. And she just immediately chirped, you wouldn't have been bitten if you ran faster. And that weekend I ran 12 in the 100 meters and 24-1 in the 200 meters. So I was a slow donkey in like right when I graduated university. So when I wanted to kind of make the assault on some world class performances, I knew I needed to kind of make up time somehow. And the easiest compromise in my head was, all right, let's do no acceleration work, because if I just do top speed, when am I going to be in like a deep leaning position in the hurdles anyways? Like maybe 2 seconds out of the 13 seconds, but I'm in an upright stance from 13 meters to 110. So I wanted to work on just my top speed because I felt like it have the most transfer. So I've kind of neglected acceleration work, and that's really ruined my top speed. And one of the reasons why I mentioned my top speed has plateaued at around like kind of one flat. I think if I work on my early acceleration again, have some full acceleration rate runs, I'll get transfer in like a month. So the only time my top speed improved this past year was October to November, which is when I did the 0 to 30 meter run all out. But after that, I did 0 to 3 hurdle acceleration run. Just because as a hurdler, you have 2 times more elements you have to develop. So I figured I had to give up acceleration, but not top speed, and also give up speed endurance. So I think next year I'm gonna have a little bit less hurdling and have a little bit more running, especially 0 to 30 meters, and as well some longer runs to 200 meters. So that's what I'm gonna do. If I figure out this piece, my top speed improves, my acceleration improves, and as a consequence, my strength improves and my hurdling improves. So that's the only big fix that I kind of have on my head. Like I kind of live the semi-pro athlete lifestyle. So there's kind of like no lifestyle change I need to make. I work out at a gym. Like I work out at one of the rare facilities where there's a track flooring and there's a high performance weight room right underneath. So I can do like a potentiation complex with a 30-second like break in between the facilities. So I'm in a pretty fortunate situation. Other than that, fix my acceleration, and other than that, I'm pretty solid, man. So that's what I need to change for next year.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we could talk all day. We're almost closing in on an hour here.
Yeah.
I definitely think we need to go for a part 2 here eventually down the road.
Yeah.
So I like to wrap things up on this podcast with kind of like a speed round. So, branching off just what you are preparing for this next year. And first question of the speed round are what are your goals for next year as an athlete?
My goal is to run at least 13.8 seconds or just get under 14. I was around 14.3 this year. Get under 14. And yes, simple goal.
And would that get you into the trials?
Yes. So the trials are quite easy to make. Dude, I would never make the trials in the US. It takes you a 13-1 run to make it into the finals. So it get me into trials, and I'd be top 6, man. If I can run that performance at the championships. The championships is happening next week. Unfortunately, I didn't want to go this year because I have to pay my own flight to Montreal, which was a $900 investment, and there's not much on the line anyways. But yeah, next year I want to punch hard, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. What is one book that you're reading right now and one book that you would recommend for everybody else?
General book or speed training book?
Let's go training book.
Okay. One book I am reading right now. Let me see what I have on my desktop. I'm not reading so many books as much as I am reading like articles. So I like looking at biomech articles nowadays, like the Daegu studies, the Berlin studies. I like that a lot more. But a book that I constantly... All right, what am I reading right now? Let's be simple. Let's say, usually let's say no book I'm reading right now, but what I have open in my desktop is Chronic Adaptations to Eccentric Training, a systematic review. So that's just an article by some New Zealand researchers. That's what I'm reading right now. One training book I'd recommend to absolutely everybody is the Charlie Francis Training System. Good book.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing. That was literally the first training book I ever read. So
Still the best, man.
I met a trainer here, and some people know my story, but I met a trainer here through EliteTrack.com. It was ironically 10 minutes away from me, and he reaches out to me. And at the time, I was kind of like, what would a coach here know, you know?
Yeah.
And I met with him, like he just opened up my whole world, and he introduced me to like Charlie's work and all that stuff. And first book he recommended me to read was the CFTS, and that completely changed my outlook. I mean, it was just fabulous how much you can learn from that.
I mean, not even so much that it's complete in a treatise in training a guy that eventually ran 9.79 seconds. He writes down absolutely everything, but that also like the financial and the politics and just the amount of motivation that you have. Like, one of my favorite Charlie Francis quotes is, if you wait till someone hands you something, you're waiting until like hell freezes, man. It's never gonna happen. You gotta kick over some dumpster cans and knock down people's doors. And that's the message I get from that book. Like, just some guy who was just absolutely crazy in that he compromised for nothing. Absolutely compromised for nothing. Like, he lived on a $300 salary a month to develop world-class athletes. So he's the man.
Yeah. I don't think people realize that one of the things that really opened my eyes too was like the recovery modalities that he used. Obviously, he's one of the top massage therapists in the world, but like in terms of simple recovery modalities that you can do for essentially no cost at all in your own home, that was so eye-opening to me. And that's another topic that we could dive into.
Recovery,
as well. So one last is, what are either just one tip or multiple tips that you would tell a young athlete looking to become a better athlete or coach or just learn more about athletics?
One advice I give to a developing athlete is, I'd have to think because I want to be very careful and make sure my advice is good. I would say anything you do it well. So yeah, that's anything that's worth your time in doing needs to be done well. So whether it's in school or track or other things in life, anything that you put your hands on, don't make it worse. Make something better by the effort you put into the world. So, I mean, the top coaches, the top athletes have always been excellent at doing this. Like, they don't compromise for anything. So some of the best athletes that I've known, they're the guys that do their homework, show up on time, encourage teammates, just simple things. And that kind of cascades into everything you do on the track. And there are some athletes that aren't that good, whether it's socially, academically, or other things. And my advice to them is, do your homework first before you worry about your fly 30 times. So anything that's worth doing is worth doing well. Lord Chesterfield.
Love it. I mean, you absolutely killed this podcast. I wish more people would get to know about who Jackson Chun is, because you're honestly one of the smartest young guys I've ever met.
Thanks,
and
man.
I don't even want to throw the young title in there. I mean, you're just period one of the smartest guys I've ever met.
I'm crazy for this stuff, man. I'm crazy for this stuff.
Exactly. How can people find you? Do you have a website?
Yeah.
Instagram? What's your handles for everything?
The easiest way is just Instagram. I'm pretty active on it. I post frequently. I post everything. I treat it as a training log. So unfortunately, I don't kind of cherry pick research studies, which maybe makes some of my posts a little hard to read. But I think that kind of is the way I want to approach it. Like, just post as I would post as like any guy. It's authentic documentation of training. I hate it when people kind of only post the best. Like, post everything, man. Like, that's Like if you're Justin Gatlin, freaking show me everything. Show me your dumbbell bench. Show me absolutely everything. And that's kind of how I approach my Instagram. I'm just very open. Jackson Cheung Sprint. I also have Twitter that I don't have too much of following on, but Instagram is a good way to reach me at Jackson Cheung Sprint. So
perfect. Well, Jackson, I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks,
this was an awesome
pleasure.
podcast. We definitely have to do this again sometime.
I'm looking forward to it.
That'll do it. Thank you guys for listening to this episode with Jackson Chun. I'm almost certain that you guys got a ton of good information from this podcast. If you guys want to find us, you can look at boom-athletics.com. Also listen to this podcast on Spotify or Anchor, and soon to be coming on iTunes. Check us out on @BoomAthletics on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as well. Thank you guys for listening, and stay tuned for the next one.